Good evening, everybody. I think it's probably time that we started. I know we've been having a few problems getting here today. Some people have, but.
Hi committee, can I just do a few housekeeping before the committee starts, please? Please note that this Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when speaking. This meeting may also be audio recorded and/or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. There are no scheduled fire alarms. If the alarm goes off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble at the front of the building by the public toilets. And finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, well, I know I've had three apologies, Jane Kelly, Peter Hall and Susan Phillips. Could I just I've mentioned it to a few people, we're going to have an informal session at the end of this meeting for councillors, for an information session, so that will be at the end. Substitute members, I believe we have Lawrence Williams, welcome Lawrence, and Drew Mellor, welcome Drew. I believe Mark he's not able to turn up, so thank you very much. Any declarations of interest at all? No? Okay. So for the confirmation of minutes, does anybody have anything to add? No? No, agreed? Okay. I'll just now, I believe there's no public questions, no public statements, and no petitions. Now, I'm going to swap over the item 6 on the agenda. I'm going to swap with item 8, just because of who is here. The first item we're going to look at, so that the main agenda, is item 8, the BCP front door. I believe Steve Murray is going to present. Thank you very much and welcome. Yes, so for anybody who hasn't used it before, it's the button on the right to talk, and if people can remember to do it, that'll be handy.
Okay, good evening. My name's Steve Murray. I'm a service manager for the front door services in BCP. That's the MASH, the assessment teams, and the out of hours service. A verbal update for you on the progress of the front door services since the inception of BCP. It's been a period of significant change, as you're aware, and the front door services have been subject to a reviewing system to review the effectiveness of both the need for us to safely discharge our responsibilities whilst remaining child and family focused. As a result, we've crafted a new Children's Services Learning and Improvement Plan, which is commonly known as the LIP, which aligns the delivery of Brighter Futures and focuses on three main areas. They are children who are in need of help and protection, children in care and achieving permanence, leadership, management and governance. In terms of our improvement journey so far, we've worked very closely with our DFE sponsored partners in practice, which are North Tyneside Council. They've helped us to look at a number of improvements in our front door. And these improvements are both underway now and being worked on for the future, with clear milestones in place. The key areas of focus are the timely access to early help services, the timely decision making at the first point of contact, partnership working to support robust and timely decisions for children and families, consideration of the integration of the duty assessment service, which will reduce the number of professionals involved in each family. The support of the LIP. To support the LIP, there's a sophisticated set of performance indicators being created, and that will drive and improve the quality of practice whilst ensuring the needs of children and families are met in a consistent and timely manner. To continue to support and develop practice standards, we've implemented a new quality assurance framework which will offer and challenge all staff working within the front door services, especially in relation to the quality of our response and decision making. The service has adopted a practice model called Signs of Safety, which is being rolled out across all children's services and partners, and we have a dedicated trainer to drive that implementation. The decision was made early on in our improvement journey to move to an integrated case management system. That's our computer system, client records, which is now Mosaic, which strengthens the oversight rather than having two different systems. Key actions for the next 3 months to support the demand on services. Further work is required on the threshold document, which supports partners in better understanding our referral pathways for access to services. Joint work is being undertaken with police colleagues regarding the development of a response to child exploitation and associated vulnerabilities, which will include operational engagement to review high-risk young people when they're identified. This service will be integrated within our front door services arrangement. Timeliness of decision making and effective pathways into early help will ensure that families are not unnecessarily subject to statutory intervention from social care, and the LIP will focus on timeliness of assessments, which historically have lasted 45 working days, and we believe we can reduce the length of time they take to be proportionate to the needs of the family, so that families are getting services in a more timely way. The progress of the improvement journey will be robustly monitored, which I can assure you it is, through a new Children's Services Performance Government arrangements. The Quality Performance and Impact Board, the QPIB, is already implemented and monitors progress against the LIP and key performance indicators governed through this accountability board.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm very grateful that you was able to stand in on quite short notice on this. Any questions? Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Steve, you referred in your presentation to a new learning and improvement plan. I'm wondering why that's not something which is available and in front of us today.
I can't actually tell you why it's not available today, but I can certainly take that back and ask for it to be presented at the next meeting if you'd like. Sorry,
just to come in on that, if that's okay, Chair. What you have got in front of you is the self-assessment, out of which the LIP is developed. So you'll see at the back of the self-assessment, we come onto that item, it talks about the learning improvement plan actually delivering on the outcomes that are within the self-assessment. So that's the level of information that we are presenting to committee. Clearly, we're happy to have a conversation about the more detailed level of the LIP, but it is quite a detailed document that then breaks down into more detailed documents underneath it. So, I say it's not that it's not here. The things that drive it are here. The document itself is not here because that's an officer-led piece of work. But happy to take a view on that in future.
Perhaps I can come back on that, Chairman. It does, the next report, which obviously we'll get to, does say that there are 15 areas identified. I think it would be useful for this committee to see what the RAG rating is for those 15 main areas. I do think that's something which should come to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yeah, I just have this one question. You've gone for mosaic, because there was two different systems in place.
There were, yes. There was a care director system in old former Poole, and there was mosaic version in former Bournemouth, and there was a third mosaic or second mosaic system in a different configuration in former Christchurch.
So the question is, can you explain why mosaic was actually chosen in the end?
Right, which was seen as quite a significant risk, rather than mosaic, which was a more stable format. So those are the two key issues in the end.
And were there any cost implications with that decision?
Absolutely. Either way, there was going to be significant cost implications. That is still being entirely bottomed out how much it's going to cost for that. But it's a very significant amount of money that will be required to make that happen, because it's a very significant change to migrate all the records that are currently on Care Director over onto Mosaic, train everybody, get everybody up to speed on that. So that is a piece of work that is ongoing now, with a view to commencing in April.
Thank you for that. Do you have any more questions? No, in that case, I mean, really, we're more interested in the new learning plan, aren't we? So I think, as a committee, we'd like a bit more information on that. A bit more detail, although I feel we don't want to be overwhelmed with detail on this. So some of the key points would be quite useful. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll move on to item 7 then, the children's outcomes. Yeah, so, sorry, but Becky, we swapped things over because are you ready and happy to? Yeah, that'll be good timing then. Thank you. First off, may I thank you for making that journey, and also thank you for the work with the Youth Parliament, because I believe it's been really successful this time. A lot of interest, and I've heard a lot of excitement from various places. So thank you.
Cool. So I'm just going to give a bit of a background for those of you who don't know lots about Youth Parliament. So previously it was a process across the 3 authorities where Bournemouth withdrew about 8 years ago. Christchurch participated in elections as part of the Dorset Member of Youth Parliament, and Poole had elected members of Youth Parliament sort of since it was formed, and transformed the process in 2016 to an online vote. So the budget was agreed in November 2019 to run it as a 1-year pilot across the BCP area to sort of see how it worked. And due to the sort of time constrictions and constraints, we went with the Poole model sort of as a rollout. So young people need to be aged 11 to 18 and live or go to school in the BCP area to be able to stand and to vote. And due to the numbers of 11 to 18-year-olds in the area, our entitlement grew from 1 member of Youth Parliament to 2. And then replicating that, there's not a sort of national requirement to have deputies, but we had in Poole, so we increased that to 2 deputies. So the approach sort of embarked on a compulsory 2-hour introduction workshop for young people who were interested in standing, that they had to attend to explain the role and then the process to election. There was a campaign preparation session, a hustings event, an online election in schools, and then the result event. So I'll just give you a little bit of sort of detail on each of that, if that's okay, and then kind of the results. So we ran 5 workshops between the 6th and the 16th of January across sort of civic buildings and libraries, and had 68 young people from 18 different schools and 1 home educated young person attend. And that's a kind of quite vast amount of different schools. At the campaigns workshop on the 20th of January, held at Bournemouth University, we require our candidates to stand on 2 of the top 5 from the Make Your Mark ballot, which about 5,960, just to be a little bit precise, young people across the area completed in October. Top issue was environment, and we had the borough's sustainability manager, people from Parks and Open Spaces, and the Only Leave Footsteps Behind campaign there to help them prepare on that. On knife crime, we had Dorset's Police's local and national lead. On mental health, we had the CAM service manager, the CCG lead, and Dorset Mind. PSHE, we had some previous MYPs who campaigned on it. And on child poverty, we had the Citizens Advice Bureau, as well as 3 elected members to help them prepare their campaigns. So from that, we had 45 candidates step forward, which was a slight challenge, but was brilliant. That was from 16 different schools, and again, one was home educated. So just to put it into a bit of a context of what that looks like across sort of BCP. So Christchurch had 2 schools had candidates, Bournemouth 6 schools had candidates, Poole 6 schools had candidates. One was out of BCP area but lived within the authority, and one was Bournemouth and Poole College. So 75% of the candidates campaigned on mental health and 65% on protecting the environment. Other personal issues included equality, diversity and inclusion, safe spaces for young people to go, ensuring young people are involved in decision making, young carers and votes at 16. So on the voting, it was an online vote operated mainly through schools, but young people could request a code, and it ran from the 4th to the 27th of February. 5,930 young people voted in 24 schools across the whole of the BCP area, including some of our special schools and our alternative education provision. Some schools went even further. I know Linwood allowed their students to pretend they were candidates, and they made videos or different things like that. They had hustings events in assemblies. So turnout was 19% of all 11 to 18-year-olds in the BCP area, and 26% in a BCP school. So again, breaking that down into what that looked like across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, 36% of the votes were in schools within the Bournemouth area, 16% within Christchurch, and 38% within Poole schools. So considering it's the first year we'd run it across the area, it was quite a good divide, and the remaining 10%, for those of you quickly doing your maths, were either in Bournemouth and Poole College, not in a BCP school, or requested codes centrally. Just some real headlines for turnout. So 87% of students in Carter Community College voted, 91% in Bowcroft, which actually isn't within our area, but they emailed in saying we've got 11 students who live in BCP but attend our school, can we have codes? And they used 10 of them. And 99% of students who were eligible to vote in Winchelsea, one of Poole's special schools, voted, which I think is a real success. So overall, 3% of our turnout was in our SEND students in our special schools. So we were really proud of that. So then our newly elected members of Youth Parliament, I think, are going to swap into the table in a minute. So our 2 new members, some have both got more votes than a couple of our councillors and 1 cabinet member. Just putting it out there. But so Nathan, wave at you. Nathan Collins, he received 646 votes, and he was in the top 4 of 44% of the schools that voted. Sarah Lockhard received 627 votes. I think the difference is Sarah had a school behind her that really went for her. So most of your votes came from Bourne Academy, where she's at school. So it was a real push from the school in that case. And then Georgia, who's not with us tonight because she's not well, was in the top 4 in 48% of the schools. And Adaya, who was behind me there, was in the top 4 in 24% of the schools. So that's kind of our headlines in terms of the process. I think we're going to sort of swap round with them to let Nathan and Sarah join the meeting for the rest of the thing, and then can either ask myself or them some questions if you wish.
Thank you very much, and please swap away.
Yeah, and then I'll go.
And welcome, and thank you for turning up. I don't think we've got many questions to ask on that. I don't know if anybody got any particular burning issues that they would. I mean, my interest is I'd love to know what the priorities are for the year. I don't know if you had a chance to do any work on that yet, because I know it's quite a fresh thing, but would be if possible, could you bring some of that to a future meeting if you're not prepared?
Yeah, I mean, you guys could talk about what you campaigned on, and then because obviously we've got 4 members and they campaigned on 3 things each,
Yes,
we tend to then look at where they can double up and how they can work together. But I think there's some key themes in terms of, so if you want to talk about what you campaigned on.
Hi, so I campaigned on protecting the environment, stopping knife crime and child poverty.
And I campaigned on the environment, mental health and votes at 16. I think mental health will obviously link in quite well, but also the girls have campaigned on PSHE, so I think we can really bring those to the meetings.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry, Drew.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was just a brief question. It was probably more for you. I was just saying, look, this is an amazing piece of work that's been done, and I think that the refresh of it through BCP, and the engagement is really strong. I was a councillor in 2001, and I remember there being a youth parliament then, and effectively, what's always we have very good interaction with youth members, but then it's actually how do we get that interaction and that piece of work to work into our forward plans. So my question is effectively, how can we be confident that this fantastic piece of work and this brilliant engagement is going to land into somewhere in our driving our forward plans of things we should be looking at. It's much wider than this committee, because this is just about children and young people. You've got CAMS sits in other places, so I'm just really keen that this fantastic piece of work actually lands with us somewhere, and I'd like some comfort about that, please.
So that's one of the reasons with the campaigns prep workshop that we invite kind of lots of partners in. So already as a result of that, we're looking at holding a meeting probably end of April, beginning of May, around sort of climate emergency and how that impacts. And also would be really short-sighted if we didn't make use of the 70 young people nearly that have engaged with the workshops. Yeah. So they're all being invited to that. So the elected young people have been invited to full council as well by Chief Exec. So hopefully attending in the 31st of March. Again, linking in, we've got another meeting with Dorset Mind and CCG around how their priorities can impact on that. And I think potentially back with the police officer. In terms of coming back here, yesterday 4 of them attended, the 4 of the new ones attended the forward planning training session, where we were looking, and they were in small groups, and they were looking at what they'd like to scrutinise over the next year. And I think you felt really pleased that what you'd said in your groups had been listened to, and potentially is now on the forward plan. We're doing some work on our participation strategy, and again, I think how we ensure that we look at the forward plan and perhaps do some work in making sure it's not just these young people sitting here, but they've been out and about and talked to other young people and are bringing their views back. Because I don't think it's helpful to have young people at the table if they're just pointing out errors on the detail or things like that. It's about them bringing what it's like to be a young person in BCP area on the issues that you're scrutinising and making that real. So some of them they'll have experience on, and others they'll need to go and do some more research, and we'll need to support them to do that.
And that's a fantastic answer, and I really appreciate it. And I think that your last point is potentially the most valid one there. It's not about just coming and doing the same format that we sit through on a regular basis. It's about working out different ways that we can interact, across from portfolio holder, chair, and the wider council. So, yeah, thank you for the work on it, and congratulations.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just say that I did attend a couple of the sessions during the hustings and the results, and the standard of debate was really high, and I was very, very impressed. And yeah, like you, Drew, I'm really looking forward to working with these guys. I think it was an absolutely outstanding piece of work, Becky.
Thank you.
So well done for that, and thank you very much for coming along, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so just a couple of practical points, just so that you know that if you do want to speak, you just need to catch one of our eyes, and we put you, it's a vice chair and myself, I have a list here, and when you speak, you just need to press the button, and when you finish speaking, remember, turn it off again when you're finished. So just to summarise, I'd like to again congratulate and welcome you. I think we're all very pleased at the way it went, and the input and the number of people involved. And what we're asking is as you suggested, for you to bring input from not just yourselves but as many young people as possible, because we really want to hear that. Thank you. So trying to get back into the right order of the agenda again.
Seven now.
7 now, yes. That's we're now on 7. So this is the Children's Outcome Self-Assessment from January this year. So this is that committee because it's in line with best practice for the authority, and it's focusing on the areas that the committee has actually shown interest in the past. Just one thing to note, as a committee we need to decide at the end whether we want this to return quarterly, half-yearly, annually, or any other way that we'd like to look at this coming back to us. I know we've had some pre-discussions about that, but it's what we need in mind during this. And Neil, I believe you are going to present it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm going to give an introduction to the paper in front of you. The committee will be aware that this is obviously the third time we've come to you with a self-assessment, and just to echo the Chair's comments, we would be interested in your views on how often we come with this. It's quite a detailed piece of work. We do update it quarterly, but how often it comes through the panel for your comments is something that we would like to steer on. What you've got before you is the Q3 self-assessment of the children's services that was used as part of our annual conversation with Ofsted. So this is the presentation that we went through with Ofsted and had a conversation about the outcomes and our plans for the future. You'll have seen before that this is a detailed piece of work and quite long, so I don't intend to go through all of it. I do welcome your questions on any aspect in here, but we may have to ask Steve to join us again from Children's Social Care to ask some of the more Children's Social Care specific questions, if that's okay with you. As the overarching report states, there are some key issues for us coming up. We've talked about the Learning Improvement Plan already, and we'll take back your comments on that. Once again, it's a detailed piece of work that is still being completed, but we'll take away your comments about wishing to see the priorities on that and the RAG ratings and everything that the progress that's being made with on that. Within the report itself, it talks about priorities for the coming 6 months around developing access points for early help and for social care, and clear lines into those services and between those services, and Julian may speak about those later. Some work around complex safeguarding and developing a team to pick those issues up. Looking at permanence, you'll be aware that we had a focused visit on permanence and some recommendations from that report that we need to put in place to drive forward permanence planning for looked after children care. Signs of safety, you've heard us talk about that a number of times, about the practice model that we use, and Steve could talk far more about that than I could, embedding that in everything that we do. And then, as we've already mentioned, harmonising our case management systems across children's services, which is a piece of work that is ongoing and will take a significant investment to drive through, but is underway. The actual presentation itself, as you'll see, is quite long and goes through in detail in specific areas. It starts off by talking about what we've achieved to date, and then goes from some specific data issues just to give a picture of BCP as a whole, which I hope is useful and we can take questions on. And it then goes through individual areas, starting with early help and going through those aspects of social care with some data, and in the purple boxes on each page you'll have seen there's sort of our self-assessment element is within that demonstrates what we're going to take from this area, what we need to take forward, what we're pleased with performance, and where there is improvement work to be undertaken. Further on, there is an update on the quality assurance work that we're taking on, so the audits of work that we're taking on across social care and the outcomes of that, and from serious case reviews where an incident has happened and we've had to look into it in some detail and the learning that we take from that. There's learning from complaints and compliments, always very important to have the compliments in there. And as ever, we have more compliments than complaints, which is always very pleasing. And there's also some information about the virtual school and how we're supporting children in care to access education and the workforce issues that we're taking forward. So, like I say, rather than go through it in any huge amount of detail, you've got the covering report that summarises the priorities for the coming 6 months. You've got the detailed report, and between Julian, myself and Steve will absolutely try and answer your questions on any of the detail within it.
Okay, so it's over to any questions or comments. Who would like to start us going? Eddie. And thank you.
Sorry. Under children in care on the paper, can you just elaborate a bit where it says only 14% of our children in care are placed only over 20 miles from their home? Can we just have a bit more detail on that? Because there was a report only recently about children in care within the Dorset area being farmed out further afield, and I just wanted to get the sort of numbers and the accommodation that they're in. They're not in caravans like it was mentioned in other places of the country, and perhaps Neil can or just fill that in, please.
I can start, and Steve might want to comment. So this is one of our key indicators that we measure about where children in care are placed. I think we would say that it's clear that in the vast majority of cases, the outcomes for children in care are better if they're placed nearer to home and within the BCP area. We absolutely want to keep our children within our area. There are certain sets of circumstances where it is desirable and or necessary for children to be placed out of the BCP area, where they have very specialist needs, and those needs can only be met in provision outside of the BCP area. But what can also happen is if there is no provision within the BCP area, if we had insufficient provision, then we would have to be placing outside and placing children further away, and that's why it's a key measure for us to make sure we have sufficiency of access to the right type of care locally. 14% is a good outcome. Overall, those children that are placed away are in the main in very specialist provision of one form or another, meeting their needs in a very specific way. We are very much in contact with those children. They are visited. We are keeping their links back to the BCP area. So we think this is a positive level to be in. And as it says, we're actually outperforming the national and regional averages for this. So I think that's really a good story, but something we absolutely want to keep an eye on because it is important in relating to outcomes for those children.
Okay, just before Mike says we next, anybody else anything on children in care, just to follow the, is it about children in care? Yeah, totally.
Thank you. So effectively, and I apologise if I've missed previous papers where I'm substituting today, but I just thought that was a very interesting upward tick in terms of the rate per 10,000 population. So I just wanted to, it looks like a very consistent figure and then it's gone up, so I just wanted to understand why. What drivers would that have for that to go up, and also whether anecdotally we were still at that heightened figure or not, because we're now in March.
Okay, thank you for the question. So children care numbers do vary over time, and we need to keep an eye on that. I think it's. I think I can say in answer to the final part of your question, has the number come down again? No, I think it still stays at a higher level than is demonstrated at the end of Q3. It is something we're very focused on for many reasons, obviously to have the best interest of the child most definitely, but also there are budget and other implications of having children in care that we have to manage through the council. So across all of those needs, we need to keep an eye on it. I'm aware that in looking at this, social care colleagues have talked about some big family groups coming into care, which has pushed the number up. So rather than one child coming through, it's a family group of maybe 4 or 5 sometimes, or more than that sometimes, and that has had an impact in this quarter. But overall numbers have increased, and we do need to look at that, and that needs to link into what we're doing prior to care through early help and through other services to ensure children have the best support before they come into care. But the quality assurance work we've done has demonstrated that the right decision was made in those cases. So we're confident that we are doing the right things, but numbers have increased.
Okay, so I'll just come up briefly then. So effectively, you're saying it's just circumstance affected. It's not that we have changed something in the way we are putting our policy out, or there's been any national change.
No, I don't think so. No, I think, like I say, these numbers do fluctuate. I do think we have to be aware that numbers are increasing, and for many reasons we have to be very much aware of that. But like I say, we've done a lot of quality assurance work to make sure the right decisions are being made for those children. Steve's area of doing a lot of work on that, and we are reassured that the right decisions are being made for children at the right time.
I think there are key areas to focus on. So there are areas like unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, whether that's been affected by Brexit in terms of the ability for them to travel to England. We've certainly seen an increase in numbers arriving recently. Homeless young people from 16, 17-year-olds. I think that's a big area of concern for us, that a lot of those young people are turning up claiming homelessness, and of course then our responsibility is to consider whether they come into our care. So there are areas that we need to keep focused on and manage quite clearly.
Thank you. Mike, did you had a...
Yes.
You may. It's on. Julian.
Just to build on that slightly, I just want to restate our commitment to keeping children as close to home as possible, because that's the essence of what we're trying to do, obviously. You'll have heard me talk at various stages around developing an integrated adolescent hub for some of our more challenging adolescents within our communities. But alongside that, and these are typically children who we might describe as being on the edge of care. So alongside that, there's work going on at this moment to extend our short-term residential options for children who are at risk of slipping into care arrangements, because there are moments in times when you can stop children moving into long-term care. So there are opportunities to have short-term residential options where, if you like, you can restabilise children within their families and keep them in their local communities, because that has been their wider interest. I just want to restate our ambition around that more generally. Thank you.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I apologise if it's been raised before at a previous meeting. It's to do with children in care education, page 33, and the results for Key Stage 1, which frankly is something of a disaster. We've gone from 60 to 70% getting expected outturns, with we've dropped down to less than half that. We're into the 20s and 30s. Appreciate a comment on that.
So the results did actually drop markedly. We spent some time trying to understand this, and it has been raised to varying degrees. In the first instance, one of the challenges is that it's such a small cohort of children. So any shift in terms of outcomes, good or bad, has a really significant impact on the percentage figure in the rounds. If you're only talking about 8 or 9 children, and you had a really good cohort one year. So that's a part explanation. But actually, another one which is possibly controversial is that the Key Stage 1 cohort last year was almost all boys. And that's not a reflection on boys, it's a reflection on the early development of boys. So that sounds controversial. It's not quite as controversial as it sounds.
Okay, Mark, following the children in care, yes.
Yes, it was still relation to the good education. It was just about these 19 children who are children in care who are not on roll, and I just wondered what the story is behind that and what provisions been made for them.
So you'll appreciate, Council, obviously, that our children in care have often been through, or likely, or certainly been through some of the most challenging of experiences. They can be particularly hard to engage, if I'm honest, in social contexts called schools, because all the demands that brings with schools, and when it works well, it works really well. Of course, when it really doesn't work, it really doesn't work. And actually, there are a small proportion of children who are in care who are not accessing a structured or formal education. And that does challenge our thinking about what is suitable and appropriate for a child at any given moment in time. And for those proportion of children, those 19 children, we have to develop really bespoke individual packages, the kind of packages which a lot of people might reflect on and go, that's not my understanding what education looks like. But sometimes you have to design things around what children need at a moment in time. They're normally very flexible and quite innovative in what they tend to include. They might not reflect typical understanding of what learning feels like or looks like. Something we're not happy with, and has been raised previously, is that these children are not enrolled in a school as well, because that's a different issue completely. And when the virtual school who oversee provision for children in care was subject to a peer review recently, we took some quite significant challenge around that from our peers and other local authorities, who said that notwithstanding the challenges these children bring, you should be able to get them enrolled in a school. It's not completely straightforward, but it's been put to us that we haven't used the systems that are available to us to escalate our concerns sufficiently through the system so that we can look head teachers in the eye and make it quite clear there's a requirement to place these most vulnerable children on their school roles. And if we can't achieve that ourselves, there are mechanisms for escalating it through to the Secretary of State ultimately. So we've confirmed our position that we want all children to be on roll, children in care or otherwise, because that's right and proper. And that position is going to be shared with head teachers in the near future, and there'll be some pretty strong assertive approaches to our head teacher colleagues to try and bring that into reality. But it is a challenging conversation to have in our educational context at the moment.
Could I actually just follow that, because we're talking about the children in care who are not on roll. We've got 2 children in care who've been permanently excluded. Does your answer cover those 2 individuals as well? I'm very disappointed that we have any child who's been permanently excluded, but if I can say particularly disappointed that any child in care has been permanently excluded. So again, we've had a discussion around this. We try, and in the same conversation I'm going to be having with head teachers in about 2 or 3 weeks around having children on roll, I think it's right and proper we have an ambition that no child in care is ever permanently excluded. And I think that's the right aspiration for BCP to have. So there's been two PXs this year. It's slightly less than last year for what it's worth, but I still think that's 2 permanent exclusions too high, Chair. And our ambition is to have no children in care permanently excluded from schools. It shouldn't be represented on their educational history at all. It's just not right. Okay, thank you. Mike, I think you was.
It's on the same.
It's on children in care. Okay.
I just know.
Okay, Mike, new topic.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's not really a list, Eddie, but there are 1 or 2 points that I want to make, one of which I have made in the past, and I'm still not quite clear why we're getting it, and that is the interplay of lower and higher with better and worse, because in some of the charts and the data, lower actually means better. And if we're getting that interplay of words, it makes it much more difficult to interpret the data and know exactly what is happening. So I'd like to see the use of better and worse rather than lower and higher. Page 11 of the report, page 29 of our documents. Second line on performance, this is lower than national, and then a bit later on something or other, a different data set which is worse than. So it runs through, and it isn't easy to get a grasp of exactly what is being meant. So that's just one observation. Second observation on the same page is a statement 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, so we have a comment on that, so we'll just go to that first.
So thank you for your comment, and I do take that on board. I think what we do have sometimes is indicators where there's not necessarily a better or worse. Okay, we are lower or higher than the national average. So if we take children in care, there is a right number of children in care, and we can be higher or lower than the average. But if that's better or worse depends on the circumstances of those children. So we just have to be slightly careful about that. And I'm not saying it's right in every instance within this report, and I'm very happy to take away your comments and look at that. But just to be clear, in some of the things that we measure, it's difficult to say it's better. You know, you might say it's better to have fewer looked after children, but it's not if there are children who are not in care who should be in care. So that is the way that this is written, to try and reflect that. And I agree, it's very easy to mix those two things up, and if we've got it wrong, I apologise, but I just wanted to be clear that there isn't always a better and worse. There's just we are higher or lower than the average, and that may be right for BCP because BCP is unique and the children are unique. So it's just a comment, but I'll take it away and absolutely make sure we reflect that.
Could I suggest something that we could? So if it is the case where when it lower or higher is better or worse, perhaps we could use a bracket with better or worse put in afterwards. Would that help?
It might do. I take the point that Neil's making, and that helps to clarify. So may I continue, Chair?
Unless we have any more questions on better or worse. In that case,
richer or poorer?
Richer or poorer.
Poorer, I think. Yes, on bullet point 4, the last sentence, each of these cases, and this is to do with child protection plans, has had, I'm reading it as has had because each is singular, had scrutiny to understand the reasons for this. It would be useful to actually have a little bit more detail on that, because some of those underlying reasons for that particular data set might be subjects or topics that this committee would want to look at and scrutinise, say through a working party, just so that we can understand and perhaps have a positive input into the setup. With that information there, it actually tells us nothing.
So could I ask you to share again which page you was?
Same page 11 of the report and 29 of your documents.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I can help. We did do some work on repeat child protection plans a little while ago, and the concern is that if children are removed from child protection plans too early and they represent needing a child protection plan for the same kind of reasons, it kind of indicates that you came off the plan too quickly and didn't resolve the issues. The auditing we did showed that there was no learning for us, that the repeat child protection plans that we looked at that time came back onto a plan for completely new reasons. So there were not known issues at the point the previous plan was closed. This measure also counts historic CP plans going back quite a long way. So it could be a 3-year gap between CP plans, and mum could be on a fourth next partner. So that might be the issue that's presenting the next time. So I think the way it's written is because there was no learning for us in terms of it being a concern.
Okay, I'll take your judgment on that, but there may be issues that are the committee's concern.
It may help to see some examples of repeat CP plans. I don't know. We could provide some examples of audited CP plans that are repeats.
I
give you a flavour of what the reasons are.
I think it might be a good idea. I do feel that. Yeah, yes, Julian.
So just to build on that, and this may or may not be helpful, I'll be careful, I don't want to drift into technical stuff, which is more Steve's area of business. But one of the indicators for early help as it's being developed and delivered in the future is that there are less children going through repeats child protection plans. So in terms of understanding why things sometimes don't work and children do slip up and down from CP or not, if you haven't got really robust early help arrangements in place, you're not preventing children from going into more specialist services such as children's social work. So that would always sit as a potential hypothesis as to why sometimes too many children do slip up and down from children's social work down to early help and up and down like that. I'm just having hypotheses around it. Sometimes it's hard to evidence, I suppose, is the point I'm making.
Anybody else got any questions on that particular item?
It's on the same page.
Can I just give you a pause a minute? A bit, because Lisa's got a question on from the same page.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. It was really just looking at the lower table with latest categories of abuse, child protection plans. I was just quite concerned and curious to see why we BCP figure so much higher for neglect and physical abuse, and I was wondering higher than the England and the Southwest, and I was just wondering if there were plans to do something about this to make to improve the situation.
Okay, I'll start. Steve wants to comment as well. That is a question we have asked ourselves as well, because the concern would be that neglect is being used as a catch-all for a range of need that doesn't necessarily reflect the underlying issue that's being presenting, if you know what I mean. And so we are doing a piece of work to assess whether the prime need, which is what you're looking at in the graph, actually reflects the needs of the child. Because, like you have questioned, our question is, are we really out of line on that? And why are we not featuring at all, or featuring so low, particularly around sexual abuse and the multiple issues, which seems somewhat out of line? Like I say, so what we're doing is going back and saying, is neglect, because neglect might well be part of the child's needs, but is that actually reflecting the underlying need which leads to a child in care, or whatever the intervention is? So that's the piece of work we're doing. I don't know if there's anything else to say on it, Steve.
Including the physical abuse as well, because that's higher.
Yeah, the physical abuse is quite high.
So, does that come? It's just been categorised as that, and it could be another authority could put it as.
You can be in a child protection conference and you can talk about the risk of physical abuse to a child by dad throwing plates. the family to reduce the risk of harm to the child in a timely way. And we would say that if you review that plan at 9 months in and you've not achieved that change, you need to think about doing something else, doing something differently. So the drift that's indicated here is where we feel children have been on plans too long without affecting meaningful change. Our signs of safety model that we're implementing will very much address that, because it's very focused on what are the concerns, what's going well, and what are we going to do about it. And it's a timely approach to risk management and affecting change. So I think the implementation of signs of safety will pick up that drift and deal with it.
Lisa, I think you. No. Okay. Anybody else have any? Okay. I've got there's a couple of things which are looking slightly further through. The independent learning, page 19 or 37, depending on which numbering system we're. Independent learning audit, December 19. Can I just ask, when's the next independent learning audit due, and what changes are going to be in place for that?
Okay, so this is part of our quality assurance work, and we are putting much greater focus on quality assurance as we move forward. We really see this as a route to support practice improvement. So quality assurance officers, who sometimes are seen as auditors, coming in and auditing the work of social workers, we actually want them to sit beside, support, drive good practice, and we're investing in that, and some new resources coming in to help that to be moved forward as quickly as possible. The independent learning from audit review was a one-off piece of activity that we undertook. What we're moving to now is a rolling, there'll be an ongoing programme of QA. The reason for having this particular exercise was because we were new, we were learning about ourselves, we were undertaking a piece of work. We didn't have significant QA capacity at the time, I think it's fair to say, and we had to target it very specifically. So I think what you'll see in future is more ongoing rolling audit work that says the outcome of quality assurance work is this. And that there will also be some themed audit work that says, through the self-assessment, through the piece of paper you've got in front of you, the work you've got in front of you, that we've got a concern about repeat CP plans, and there'll be a piece of QA work that will go along around that. So I don't think that terminology will be quite used in that way again, but what you will see is different forms of quality assurance and more of it going on to help support the driving up of practice standards amongst social workers, and being as effective and targeted and prioritised as it can be, rather than being somewhat retrospective, which in some ways this was a looking backwards piece of work. We actually want it to be a very here and now piece of work that says this is the quality of work that's being undertaken, this is how it can be better, this is how we can support that to go on, this is where there's learning, and we need to make sure the whole service moves forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Anybody else got any points on that? So another quick bit. You've got on page 31/49, you've got a list of 8 things which are quite an extensive list of it is 8 is quite a lot of things. Is there anything that you took off the list to cut it down to 8? So is there anything that you've taken off that which you still concerns? Or if you didn't have the capacity for 8, which of those 8 things would be the one that you'd lose?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. I think that if you go through the self-assessment, you'll see through the self-assessment boxes that are within there, there's lots of pieces of work in there, and they will form the basis of a great deal of the LIP, what we talked about earlier, the Learning Improvement Plan, which is in far more detail. The things that you see in front of you there, those 8, those are the things that we highlighted to Ofsted, because remember this was the presentation we gave to Ofsted. These are the things that we, as a senior leadership of children's services within BCP, committed to doing over the next 12 months, as it says on the sheet. So I don't think they are prioritised. I think they come as a package. These are a package of things that link together and say we need to do all of these things to support the service. But that's not all. There are lots of other action plans that we're putting together, and we've come and spoken to you about some of those, and some are on the agenda. But I don't think you could take one in particular off and say, actually, you know, if you only have 6, you'd lose these 2, because you'd lose the coherence of everything that's there. This was a very clear message we were giving to Ofsted, that we knew ourselves well, we knew where our strengths and weaknesses were, and we knew the things that we were going to prioritise in order to address those as effectively as we could. So I think that's part of the answer to the question. Moving on to if there were to be more lines where you could take things out of the self-assessment, but also this only relates in some ways to parts of our work. On the agenda later we talk about school outcomes, and this doesn't talk about school outcomes. So there are other priorities for us that sit elsewhere within this as well. This is very much social care and early help, but you know, Julian would talk about priorities for special educational needs development or school improvement and those sorts of things. So this is a package of 8 things that we're going to prioritise on for this particular piece of work, but they are within a much broader context of the things that we do. And if we were to add to this from here, like I say, we would go through the self-assessment, so actually you could look at some of these and look at those in more detail. So it's a very good question, and I hope that's answered to some degree.
Well, thank you for the attempted answer. So any other particular questions on that? Because we have a decision to make as a committee to how often we want this report to come back to us, and whether we're happy with the same format and how it's done. I mean the choices are: we continue to have it quarterly, we have it half yearly, we have it annually, or can we change things so it is slightly different to make it more useful for us? So can I have any opinions on that? Lisa, do you want to?
I just wondered if it'd be helpful if we could have a comparative, a similar, what do you call it, authority, how we come up against them, rather than just England and the South West.
Absolutely, we can certainly do that. One of the things going forward for your committee to think about will be, as we implement the corporate plan, what the key performance indicators that we bring here will be. So you'll see those regularly, and they will have benchmarking and statistical neighbours and those sorts of things in. So that will deliver some of that. For the self-assessment, we can certainly pull things out and put those in if that would be helpful. But like I said, I think it would be the key performance indicators where you'll see that comparison that would probably be helpful for you on that.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's already been said. I think it would be helpful if the key performance indicators are circulated as and when they're updated, which I think is usually quarterly. And if somebody decides there's something in there which needs to come to committee, then they can obviously raise it with yourself and the Vice Chair. But I think probably we only need to see this about once every 6 months.
Okay, just to be clear on the key performance indicators, as part of the corporate plan, a set of key performance indicators were agreed. There was 15. You may have seen them in the Brighter Futures area, and absolutely they will be kept up to date. I'm not sure if it's monthly or quarterly. Yeah, this is updated quarterly, absolutely. But the key performance indicators that support the corporate plan are updated regularly. 6 monthly it would be achievable.
Eddie, is it you are you agreeing?
Oh, I was going to second.
So our general idea is that 6 months, with it being emailed out to us quarterly, so that we can make questions by email. Is it possible to ask that when we do look at it every 6 months, that we have a bit more of some more terms explained to us? Because I know when I look at it, it always, I struggle, and I've been doing this now a few times. And yes, it's amazing what you find when you Google things, and some of the terms are different to what I think you mean. And I'm sure for people who are only visiting the committee occasionally, or some other young people, that the acronyms I know drive around the twist, because I'm not very good at those. So we sort of have a proposal, don't we? Are we all agreed with that? Anybody disagree with that? in that case, I think we can. So to sum up, we have the proposal that we've agreed on. I think our most interest is the children in care. I think we had more questions on that. The concerns about the numbers, and so I think that's what we'd like to focus in the future. I do find if my numbers are in the right order still. I think we're on agenda item 9 now. So this is a response to child exploitation, an update. So this was previously requested by members of this committee. Specifically mentioned child sexual exploitation. However, it's better to look at exploitation in general, as things are so interlinked. So there's risk involved and focusing tightly on one area. So it's looking at general exploitation. And I believe, Julian, it's over to you again.
Thank you. So you may recall that I reported into committee in, I think it was October, on early developments in the area of child exploitation more generally. And at that time, the council were looking to provide some reassurance that post-LGR arrangements in relation to some of the most vulnerable adolescents in particular were in hand, and it was a time of quite significant change and transformation. And when I spoke with committee then and fed into committee, I talked in quite broad terms about some developments that were in place. So I talked about things which people might not specifically associate with child exploitation but sit around it. So things like the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is a key part of protecting children, obviously, some strategic work that had happened around child exploitation, the place of early help as a key mechanism for supporting large numbers of children, families and adolescent offer, and our approach to missing, and a few things like that. And since then there's been a fair amount of work which has happened, and this is an opportunity to perhaps have a slightly more focused feed in around some of the key issues more specifically linked to child exploitation as opposed to the more general work that's happened. And that's what this paper tries to capture. But we have in the last 3 or 4 months taken stock of some of the challenge we've received around how we're responding to child exploitation, because we inherited some working arrangements that we agreed to trial as a partnership with other agencies, and we've asked questions as to whether they give us as much reassurance that we're protecting our most vulnerable children who are at risk of exploitation as they should be. But I'll come on to that in a minute. Essentially what this paper tries to show is some of the work that's been completed to date, and it starts off with some brief context around our strategic response. So actually delivering effective exploitation arrangements, if you like, is very much premised on your ability to engage all your partners to work with you to achieve it. It's not something that one organisation can do on their own. So we agreed a strategic position with the Pan Dorset child exploitation strategy, which gave us a headline position where we could work out what we were looking to prioritise across Pan Dorset, which is important, certainly in terms of engaging partners who work across the whole of Dorset in the first instance. The next stage of making sure we had a clear plan of where we were going was to agree a BCP specific, let's call it a place-based delivery plan. So we took the strategy of child exploitation and positioned it in terms of what we are looking to achieve quite specifically to our local population, that is Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. We have a delivery plan, an action plan, which is thereabouts signed off by the Safeguarding Children's Partnership and by the Community Safety Partnership, which is important because that's where our partners sit and that's where we can engage them and secure their commitment to working together to address this quite complex issue. Then they come on to some key pieces of work that I've dipped in and out of discussing with you in committee. I'll just talk briefly to those because they're the essence of a more specific child exploitation piece of work. The first is the Adolescent Hub, which I know I've referred to a couple of times, which is an integrated buildings-based hub, if you like, for adolescents who are challenged within their communities. And we have an ambition to have this up and running with partner support and a range of partners, CAMS, police, and health colleagues, more wider health colleagues, for September. And we're at a stage now where we're trying to secure active and meaningful engagement and response from partners, if you like, to release people and posts into the solution that we've agreed. So a final business case proposal going through to partners at the next child exploitation strategy board, which will be the mechanism by which we hope to secure the active and meaningful and financial support of our partners to support the delivery of our integrated hub, which is quite exciting, and I'm sure we'll have to feedback more detail on that in the future on request. So that's the hub, which is a core part of what we're trying to develop. There's a short reference in this paper to the place of how we respond to children who go missing. Missing is a really important indicator when we're talking about child exploitation, because when vulnerable children go missing for even short but certainly longer periods of time, they're at risk of exploitation on a number of levels, whether it's sex exploitation or criminal exploitation or other. So you may recall that I previously reported that we were unhappy with our practice and approach in relation to that, and we published new guidance around how we would respond to children who go missing, and that's been very well received. But our indicators around children who go missing are not quite as positive as we would hope, because what we're finding is that there's a requirement that when children go missing, there's an expectation we do what's recorded a return home interview with them within 3 days, which is a good mechanism for understanding why children go missing and what the implications of their going missing are. And we found that we've got really good at doing our 3-day return home interviews, but less children want to engage with us in terms of having the interview in the first place. So we've got really good at successfully doing less. So, which is not good. There's explanations around that, which is in part we've got some high numbers of repeat episodes of missing. And if you're a young person and you go missing again and again and again, and someone knocks on your door after 3 days, they'll say, "We've had this interview already. I really don't want to engage with you." So we get a bit of a fail to engage indicators coming up as well. But it has made us stop and reflect on whether the way we're delivering our interviews, engaging with young people, is as effective as it could and should be. We don't think it is. And we're looking to review, we are reviewing as we speak and changing our methodology in relation to that, mainly in terms of the professional groups who we're using to carry out the interviews in the first place. And then further to that, we are introducing some whole staff training development in relation to the key professionals linking in to young people at risk of exploitation. It's an approach called trauma-informed practice. It's a more helpful way of understanding how children who challenge us most can be best supported. So it encourages professionals not to look at adolescents who challenge us as just being very challenging, but really, really getting under the skin of what their presenting behaviour might look like. In particular, the young people who elicit often the least amount of sympathy from public professionals or other, and that's the ones who are externalising their behaviours and just being outwardly very aggressive. So evidence trauma-informed practice helps professionals really get under the skin of what's going on for that child at any moment in time. In addition, there's a short kind of commentary within the paper around how we tried to bring additional and specialist expertise into our leadership team to help us begin to rethink about how we're responding to child exploitation as a service, because we've tried to develop an approach historically whereby there was quite a blended responsibility for these young children, these adolescents rather, and we didn't have a specific service in relation to that, and we think that looking back that wasn't the right approach to take. So the service director who's supporting us, Elaine Redding, obviously in partnership with our DCS and ourselves, has positioned it so that we are looking to develop a discrete, complex safeguarding service with a kind of clear and relentless focus around supporting children with highly complex safeguarding needs, but in particular those at risk of child exploitation, which will make it absolutely clear that there can be no drift in relation to those young people at their most vulnerable time. That's the essence our response currently, and because of the nature of and the level of transformation attached to this piece of work, there's a degree of permanently work in progress attached to it. So this will develop, improve, and that's how it should be. It's more than a summary, I suspect, but I hope it's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Lisa, I believe you had the first person
Yes.
to indicate.
Just on the young people missing, I just had a couple of questions. It says that there's new guidance on, I'm guessing that's how you decide whether or not someone's considered missing or not. So I was interested in that and like the threshold. So if a child is missing but you kind of know where they are, whether or not, is this about children that report to the police missing, or just we know that they're not in the place that they're meant to be, but we might actually know where they are? And then the other thing was just about who does the returning home interviews at the police, or is it a social worker?
So there are different categories of children in terms of how they're defined by vulnerability. So a child in care is inevitably more vulnerable than a child who's experiencing a more routine day-to-day life, I suppose. So how a child is defined as being missing and requiring of a return home interview is linked to their overall level of vulnerability as we understand it, and there are kind of categories around that which are defined in the missing guidance. I haven't got the absolute level of detail around that, but I know it's broken down by level of vulnerability. In terms of who undertakes the return home interviews, the guidance it tends to sit between youth workers and social workers, and that's determined in part by whether a child's got a social worker or not. But there's a guiding principle which is it should be someone who is likely to have the most positive and reasonable relationship with that young person who's gone missing. And in the round, if a child has a social worker, you would like to think it would be the social worker, but to be fair, that's not always the case. Obviously, if a child hasn't got a social worker, then it would be a youth worker, and they wouldn't already have a relationship with their child necessarily. That's how it tends to work. We're looking to change who undertakes return home interviews. It's likely to be more likely to be delivered by youth workers. Okay. That's the way it's going.
Right, thank you. Adea.
Yeah, hello. So I'm a deputy member of Youth Parliament. I had a question on how, for example, with first-time child leaving home cases, how we inform the parents on the protocols which are in place. Because I know that many parents aren't actually informed of what to do if their child does go missing in that sense, like how long they're meant to wait, like where is the information available for those circumstances? Thank you.
Is Steve still in the room? So I actually don't have that information to hand at the moment. So that's a very good question or a very bad answer, and I'm going to say it's the former. I'm very happy to take the question away, and the next time this comes around, I will bring that information back to you. Apologies.
Thank you for the. Actually, I've got a question that follows on from the. Yeah, sorry.
So just specifically on that, I think you said next time it comes back, you'll bring it back here, but it should be possible to give the answer directly to our Member of Parliament, Youth Parliament.
Yes, yeah, I was going to suggest that because I think because I actually wanted to follow up because the term missing is quite a. Are there any children who go missing that we don't know have gone missing, and are there any children who are missing because we don't know they exist?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. Are there any children who go missing that we don't know have gone missing? Because, of course, it depends on their parents or carers reporting to us that they've gone missing. Can we get a handle on that at all? And are there any children that we don't actually know exist within BCP? There's a reason I'm asking that because I've come across a case in a different authority of a pupil who has appeared in Year 9, having never been to a school, a doctor, a dentist, and has been presented to a school just because she happened to be found to have siblings, and somebody went round to the house.
Right. So I suppose by definition there will always be children and young people who, you don't know what you don't know. But I suppose in the context of trying to keep children safe, our ambition is always to work the professional guidance, which is making sure that all professionals are sharing the information they have in relation to any child and young person at any given stage. So in the context of a vulnerable child who might be well known to one agency but not well enough known to cause concern, there's an expectation that agency shares information with our MASH. That's the whole point of the MASH, and that at any given time the different pieces of information which might alert a safeguarding concern in relation to a child is pulled together, so we get an overarching picture of that child based on all professionals' involvement. That doesn't actually answer the question about whether children go missing we don't know about, but what I'm trying to say is that as a set of a collection of professionals, we are trying to pool every bit of intelligence we have to draw and develop as full a profile of any child who may not be vulnerable in and around BCP. That was an attempt to answer your first question. Chair, could you repeat the second one again?
The second one is can we be assured that there's no children in BCP that we don't actually know exist?
Not completely. I don't think we can be completely reassured. But so we do have protocols around children who are missing from education, it's internally. So as soon as a child is officially lodged as missing from education in some shape or form, we've got some clear procedures in relation to that, to make sure that when the child is not turning up at school and there's an indication they're going elsewhere, that we have to chase them up in their anticipated context where we've been led to believe they're going to end up, and or we notify professionals in relation to that child not being in education anymore because it's a statutory responsibility to be in school. But I suppose there will be times when children are not known to us. I can't offer absolute reassurance around that. Yeah.
So if I can answer from a data perspective, so I think the answer to your question is there could be that is and we have to do everything we can to try and identify those children. What we can say is that we are now in a position where through the IT systems that we use, we are using NHS number as a single identifier. So each of the agencies, as Julian has said, should a child arrive at any of those agencies where we share data through things like the Dorset Care Record, there would be a link. It would become apparent. So if a child were to arrive at A&E, for example, having not been visible elsewhere, all of those things would start the chain of identifying it. I don't think it'd be right to assure you that it wouldn't be possible should a parent really wish to not register a child at a GP, as you say, not go to school and those sort of things, that we could be aware of that. All we can say is that at every opportunity that we have to identify such a set of circumstances, we are doing so, and our systems now talk to each other much better than they used to, and that's improving all the time, so that those sort of things will be flagged up very quickly and be passed to Steve and the MASH to take a view of. But we are, like I say, continuing to work with our systems to address that very issue, amongst others, about ensuring that we have shared data set about each young person and that we're aware of the challenges that they face.
Thank you. So, do we have any other questions? I'm just trying to think how we can summarise that. Oh, sorry, Nathan.
I'd just like to ask a few questions about the Adolescent Hub. So I just wanted to know who will be able to access it, and also how are you going to spread the message about it to people in schools?
So the aim of the hub is to, if you take a long-term perspective, is to prevent children who are already vulnerable becoming children in care, so children looked after. So the cohort of children we're looking to support in the first instance will be children who we refer to as being on the edge of care. So those are children with known and multiple risk factors associated to how they're living their lives. And there's a sense that if we can't intervene as a local authority, as a council, with our partners, there's a strong likelihood that they will slip into care, which is not good for children in the round. It creates poor outcomes for them, not always, but often. The children or young people who access the hub will typically be referred in because they're known to have multiple risk indicators of risk around them. You may be disappointed to hear this, but at any given time, we would anticipate having between 8 to 12 young people being supported through the hub, because there's a sense that they need such a level of intensity of support that to have more than that would dilute the offer, and actually with that, there are benefits we think they would accrue. So, which may not be how I presented it, to be fair. I can see that you might feel it was a more expansive offer, but it's about doing some things really, really well to a smaller number of young people, I think. So in terms of the second part of your question, how we would look to publish that through schools, we probably wouldn't be, because we don't want an open access position on that. We want it to be quite restricted and through referral only at this stage. To be fair, like everything that we tend to work through, it's always work in progress. Is that clear?
With child exploitation, a way we can combat the problem is through education and educating children on what child exploitation actually is. And from my own experience, I haven't actually been educated on child exploitation through school. So is there any way we could involve that in PHSE lessons?
Yes. So in the good question. In the action plan that I referred to, there are 4 sections. The second section is titled Prevent. And what you haven't got in the pack that I shared with you is there's a series of action points in relation to each of the key areas: prepare, prevent, identify, and respond. But in the prevent bit, there's a whole series of actions which are linked to supporting children in the context of their schools and all the curriculum offer that comes out of that, whether it's through PSHE, which has specific reference actually. But there's a number of initiatives which were delivered in partnership with a range of agencies, whether it's police, whether it's council employees that I'm responsible for, because actually it does tend to start in school, if I'm honest. So your point is well made. So yes.
Thank you. LJ.
Thank you. I'm on page 53 of the agenda pack, which is also page 53, I believe. So, yes, looking at the prepare, prevent, protect and pursue, going on to protect, the first sentence talks about providing them with early health. I was just wondering what that actually meant, but actually I think this is quite an important area, and presuming it's about looking at their health and well-being, and I'd like a bit more information about that, please.
So, yes, so health in the broader sense, less physical health, but physical health will go in the mix, I suppose, but very much health and well-being more generally, and in particular linking to how we make children as resilient as they can be at various stages of their life, in particular response to times when they're particularly challenged in what they're experiencing. There are some ambitions to have some for the most vulnerable children, making sure there are multi-agency teams around those children and their families, because positive well-being and mental health can be achieved through many mechanisms, not just through therapeutic responses, but putting a full package of support around them, which means that every aspect of their life is lifted in some shape or form to get a broader positive outcome for them, which will in turn lead to positive mental health.
So, if I may, who's actually providing this support? Is it paediatricians? Is it primary care?
So, I suppose it would depend on the individual needs of the individual child at any given time. So, trying to avoid a too formulaic approach, and any child subject to this level of protection would be subject to some sort of assessment, whether it's at the level of early help, whether it's requiring a social work assessment. And depending on what the nature of the need was that was presenting would determine, I suppose, the professional most likely to be involved. It could be a health professional, it could be an early health professional, family support, it could be life coaching, it could be all sorts of things, to be fair. They all have the potential if pulled together, to support positive mental health in the child in particular, if that helps in part.
Thank you. And how is this assessed and measured?
So, depending at the level of need we're talking about, so if it's a child sitting at the threshold of early help, which is below the level of statutory children's social work, there's a series of domains within a child's life that would be assessed in terms of their personal domains, self-esteem, confidence, well-being, and issues such as that. But then issues in terms of their family and their family context, and also their community experience as well. And assessment would tend to consider all those areas of a child's domain and work how best to respond, whether to respond at a child level, whether to respond at a family level, or whether to respond at a community level, because those are the domains which tend to influence how children and young people develop, and they will determine the package support we should probably wrap around them to make sure that stability is achieved in all those areas, and actually improvements are made as well.
Sorry, I don't think I was clear. Who assesses their health outcomes and makes sure that these are being fulfilled?
So, which health outcomes, such as psychological health, physical health?
I'm talking about all aspects of health in terms of growth and development. And these children are very vulnerable children. They're going to have massive needs in all areas. And I'm just wanting to make sure that we are actually addressing all of these things.
Okay, so I suppose I'd refer to a range of health professionals. So it would include where we can engage appropriately in this, GPs, specialist CAMs and psychologists within there, psychiatrists, health visiting professionals, and where possible and appropriate school nursing. And there's quite a wide range of professionals there. More broadly, however, as well, I don't know if I've talked about it in this meeting. There are some new initiatives going into schools. It's good to work with children in the context of schools, where we've got early intervention CAM teams being brokered into, I think, 17 or 18 of our local schools to support kind of early intervention mental health approaches with school staff supporting children directly as well. So there's quite a wide range of professionals, and they're well engaged in this type of work. So. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's Sarah, isn't it? Yes.
Just going back to the hub, obviously you said a small number of children is, it's new and that's what you can take, but I assume you'll be expanding it. And I'm just wondering if you have trouble contacting them and getting them to sort of agree to their RHIs, how are you going to get them to actually come to this place and get the support they need?
So the hub shouldn't be seen in isolation. The hub's a new initiative. We haven't got one at the moment, to be fair, and arguably it's quite an innovative thing to be trying to do, and it sits alongside a vast number of other approaches that we use to support children and young people who are vulnerable. So please be reassured the hub is not the solution per se. It was designed specifically in response to knowing we have some quite entrenched young people who are at risk at various stages. And it really has been developed to make sure we engage with them at the right time. And if I'm honest, to make sure that they don't slip out into really high cost and complex residential packages out of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So it really is quite a focused piece of work and quite a focused piece of intervention. In terms of how we engage with young people like that, the quality of a good helping professional is their ability to develop really strong and positive relationships with young people. You can have as much intellect as you like, but if you can't work and engage with other young people, you're probably in the wrong profession. So we do a lot of work across children's services to make sure people are well trained in relationship. It's referred to as relationship-based approaches, which you would think that all adults working with children and young people would be really good at that kind of thing. But actually, sometimes everyone needs a bit of support with that. So we're mindful of the fact that good intervention is based on really good relationships. And actually, within the hub itself, one of the determining features will be that once you get a key worker allocated to you, that person has to stick with you almost indefinitely, because they say that too often young people experience multiple helpers and they go from one to another to another. And over time, young people get a bit fed up with that, apparently. That's what they tell me.
Eddie, did you have a? No. Right, that's good. In that case, we need to summarise because we need to move on to our next item. So to be on, my feeling is that we're actually in agreement, but both the members and the officers, that engagement is the issue here. How do we engage both within schools and with people young people who are missing? So I think we agree with you on that. And I'm sure we'll be interested in the future to find out how that is progressing and what new ways of engagement that you're managing to come up with. School data progress update. So this is report on from a preliminary report that was at the previous meeting. I just need to, because Neil, you need to go in about 20 minutes. Is that right?
Right, so, yeah.
Yes. So just to be aware that we need to be reasonably quick and we need to focus our questions on this one.
However, to provide you with reassurance, I've invited Julia Coleman, our Service Manager for School and Provider Standards and Support, who can give you far more detail on the on the report than I could. So don't be limited in your questions by my need to go and do childcare. Just to give you a brief introduction to the report, you'll remember at the previous meeting we brought forward some headline figures for outcomes for school attainment. These always seem to come very late, don't they? We you know, if you think the exams and the results exams were sat almost a year ago now, and the results came out in August. It takes a very long time for them to be go through the system, come out, and we get national comparative figures, and that's why we come to you now, because we have that national comparative figure. The report that came last time was really headline, so this has more details in. As you can imagine, we have significantly more detail than this, but we don't present everything. We've pulled out some of the key issues, and Julia, I think, will probably go through those in a minute. But I would just start by saying, you know, we can continue to be very proud of the children, young people in BCP who have got a really good set of outcomes here. Of course, there are variations within that. Of course, there are groups who need additional support. But overall, if we look at ourselves against the national averages as the
there can be a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things that we want to do, and that we do recognise, that I mentioned before when we were together last time, is there are some primary schools that really start to close that gap for SEND young people before they do their SATs in year 6. And what we would like to see is more schools recognising that being more inclusive and working across the sort of range of workers, both inside school and us as a council wrapping ourselves around the schools, we think that that gap can be narrowed. We don't think it can be narrowed in all cases, but we do think it shouldn't be as wide as it is. And we would like to see the schools that are doing really well presenting to the others about how it can be done, because it can be done. In terms of Key Stage 2 to 4, for those of you who love acronyms, because I know you do, we do attach to this a list of what the acronyms mean. In overall broad headlines, one of the things that we have in Key Stage 2 to 4 is a real narrowing of the curriculum. And we worry about that. Ofsted are worried about it. The Regional Schools Commissioner, who's responsible for academies, we don't think she worries about that enough. And when we look at by subject, we have some very, very positive results, but the EBAC is the measure that looks at essentially the hard core subjects plus what they see as some academic add-ons, so history, geography and a modern foreign language. We think that in an area where we've heard again and again this evening, we've got young people who have interests that are much wider than that, and also if we're looking at engagement, then we need to look at how they're doing a curriculum that's more engaging. There are some genuine issues about the sheer number of schools that are increasing the number of children doing the EBAC. Nationally, at DFE level, it means that if you've been reading the educational press, that potentially our schools could be very influential at the DFE, because they're saying they'll only listen to outstanding schools and they'll only listen to lots of schools that enter a high proportion for the EBAC. But a lot of the stress around the young people that Julian's been talking about, but also a real cap on the breadth of education. We do have some concerns about that, and we certainly have some. So on paper, their results are excellent. So the achievement by grade 4 or grade 5 in English and maths, the amount of progress they're making compared to our South West regional colleagues, but also nationally, are really, really good. Most of the secondary schools in the area have achieved levels of progress that are well above national. So they're not just slipping above, they are well above. And we've given you some examples of who our statistical neighbours are. But in BCP, if you look at the disadvantaged pupils, which is around 0.23, in BCP there were 3,554 pupils at the end of Key Stage 4 last year. Of those, 646 or 18.2% were identified as being disadvantaged. That's usually economically disadvantaged, but can also include young people who might not be economically disadvantaged, but might be socially disadvantaged by things like having an experience of care. And the table shows the disadvantaged and other results for both BCP and national. And again, our disadvantaged young people are sometimes doing better than the national figure, but the gaps economically between our very poorest and our very most well-to-do young people are really, really stark. So for those individual young people, making up those gaps can be very difficult indeed. We also noticed when we were looking at progress that, of course, one of the things that, because we're inside of the system, that we almost forget, if you've not worked anywhere else, we have two things that have a really big effect on gender and progress. One is that we have 4 grammar schools, so we have selective education. So if you're not from this area, that's less usual in other parts of the country. The grammar schools are single sex, but we also have some really big single sex comprehensives. So if you're looking at the system, we've got a whole period of time when girls and boys are educated separately. The boys, particularly disadvantaged able boys, are not doing as well in that system as they might in a non-selective system. So although they're doing better than national, it's potentially possible that they could be doing better elsewhere. In terms of Send Young People, Julian's already raised a lot of these issues, and it compounds the boys issue, because far more of our Send Young People are boys than nationally. So although it's fairly standard to have more boys identified as Send in any local authority, it's much higher in our area than elsewhere, and a lot more and we have a lot more children identified as Send, and those children are not doing as well as they could be doing. There are some schools where that gap is narrowing, but generally speaking, if you look at point 29, 614 BCP, or 17.3% of pupils at the end of Key Stage 4 were identified as Send. This compares to 14.2% of pupils nationally. So we have a larger cohort identified. We're looking at ways about what that might be about. Have we got over-identification? Do we actually have more young people with Send? But we also have less provision inside of mainstream to support Send Young People. And that's something that Neil, Julie and myself and the schools are working on together at the moment. In 2019, as shown in the table, pupils with Send didn't attend or progress as well as pupils who didn't. That is reflected nationally. However, both pupils in BCP, both Send as well as those with no identified need, we attain better than in the rest of England. That doesn't mean that we think that that's good enough. We would like to do better. So closing the gap for Send Young People and for economically disadvantaged young people is one of the things that we're looking at as a whole children's services. And I've mentioned the narrow curriculum. Gender is on the next page, on page 35. So the girls, nationally the girls have generally done better, but we also have a start gap because we just have so much single-sex education, as well as it being selective. One of the things that we've noticed that is in some of the non-selective girls' schools, there's a little bit of coasting, sort of, that because they're doing better than the boys, there's an assumption that everything's hunky-dory. We don't necessarily think that's true. We think that the girls could do better. It's disadvantaged boys doing particularly not as well, but we think that bright, economically disadvantaged girls are not doing as well as they could be. Then we've got this information, so what are we doing? Because we obviously have a big responsibility. So the first thing that we've asked the Learning and Partnership Board, which is 0 to 25 inside a BCP, and the three of us are on it, is we're proposing that we have a reading conference in October this year to look at every phase of education from early years right up to post-16. What is it that we can do to teach reading better earlier, but also how we recover it where it's not recovered. So when there are things in people's education that means that they're not able to catch up, what are we doing? Because there are some of the schools who are addressing that very systematically and seriously, and there are some of them who are struggling. And of course the college are picking up the pieces post-16 as well. So we want to do a best practice conference so that the head teachers know what is working and where it is, because we feel that if reading's improved, the whole rest of the thing improves. Certainly the outcomes ought to be. We've also managed to finally get some additional maths specialist support for the area, which we're going to aim particularly at disadvantaged young people, and girls have been a bit of an issue in maths this year, and Poole Grammar School, which is also part of a big teaching school network, is going to run some networks for us next year, which we're really looking forward to. We've also, one of the things in much of the earlier discussions, we've had a lot of people coming in and doing peer reviews. One of the things that we've done with our Dorset colleagues is we've started to do a self-review of what the school system looks like across ourselves and across Dorset, and where we need to match support from school to school and from the local authority into those schools. And that can be used to bid in for more support. The better we know ourselves, the more we can convince government that we need that money. So we've started to do that. We're looking at changing data sharing agreements so that information transfers. So Neil and Julian were doing their best to talk about how we put all of that together so that there aren't children who fall through the net. But it's also really important because of the issue of attachment that both our young people and Julian have mentioned. So, for example, in one of the most inclusive primary schools that we have, in Year 6, they no longer give any language and communication support to Year 6. This is in the year where they take their SATs, when we're all meant to be teaching to the test. And that's because the children have conquered their issues. And if they've conquered their issues and they're in Year 6 and they don't need additional support, then it's our job as a system to say, well, how are we going to make sure that those children get exactly the same support in Year 7 and that they are known, understood, because they're then going to go into a much bigger environment where the transition isn't just data from one year teacher to the next, but to a whole other organisation. So the Learning and Partnership Board is going to look at how we share that information, but also how we share it in person, so that we make it personalised between organisations. And we're also looking at how we can then create support by subject, so we can look at where subjects are thriving and where they're not thriving. And we're also going to do a soft review. Somebody mentioned Key Stage 5 earlier. Key Stage 5 falls a little bit between stools, because if you ask Ofsted, who's responsible for it, they give it a grade, but that's all they do. But the Regional Schools Commissioner and the DFE do not really challenge schools around the quality of what they do in Key Stage 5. And we think we should be part of helping to support them tell that story, because each key stage, as we've mentioned before, is responsible for for preparing the young person for the next one. And that's obviously even more important for our vulnerable groups, but I think it's important for all of them that we know what they've gone on to and how successful that's been. Happy to take any questions.
Well, first off, thank you very much for that. And I would say, go back to what you said to start with. Yes, I hate acronyms, but I do love glossary sheets, and I do love acronyms being explained in a text.
You'll be really pleased to know that our work experience trainee last year did that. Our very first trainee in the team, who said after a week, we said, how's it going? And he said, I haven't got a clue what you're all talking about. So his reward was to help us write our glossary.
Well, that was a good reward.
It was.
I'm going to, if I may, just start with just one quick question before I. On page 58.6, it just struck me. Key stage 1 to 2. We talk about the progress doing good in all groups except boys. I was just wondering what all groups are, if that's not just boys and girls.
Well, it'd be boys and girls, but you would also include things like disadvantaged. So you would subgroup them by disadvantage. The boys are the boys as a whole group. We're not doing well, but the other groups would be disadvantaged, SEND, girls, etc.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, thank you, Eddie.
I'll start the ball rolling. Very good report, thank you very much. But as you said, room for improvement. And I'd like to hear what you were saying about SEN, and we really do need to get on top of that and have a level playing field more or less with all schools, and we need to improve. I know in certain schools, some schools are better with SEN than others, and it will be good in a couple of years' time to say that our group within SEN are on par with everybody else, and that's what we like to see, and I'm sure that's what we're aiming for. And my last point is that talking about the reading and getting people involved, I don't know whether you know that most of our libraries during the summer have a reading competition, so hopefully we're dovetailing that with our libraries, and perhaps they may even get more involved through other things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Indeed, we're going to ask the libraries if they'll be involved in helping us develop the conference, because we think the more of us who are involved, the better.
Right, thank you. Mike next, but Neil, do you need to use just before Mike starts? I'll just looking at your. Yeah, I was looking for a pause, and I thought we might not get one for a short while. Mike.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I think yes, I'm delighted to see the overall picture and the level of success. I've got two points I want to look at. One is related to this Key Stage 1, paragraph 7, and the gender gap between the boys and the girls. In a way, it would be helpful to be able to see a year or two before and I can't say a year or two after, but actually to see what the trend is, because a 1 year position, okay, it's fine, but it's not telling us whether the gap is trending bigger or smaller with the work that's being done. So picking up on that, the demographics, I think, potentially are quite interesting as an area to look at, and I don't know whether you do look at the demographics, but if you look at any age group, it's not necessarily 50% boys, 50% girls in any 1 year, and therefore if this year is exceptional in terms of that gap, which I don't know whether it is or not, is one of the possible reasons the fact that there are more boys in that year than girls, because that clearly could have quite a significant impact. Not only that, if there are more boys, are there more summer-born boys than summer-born girls? Because there again, you're looking at the level of development, and summer-born boys have a much lower level of development at this stage than the girls. And these would be really interesting areas to look at and find out if that idea that I've got is actually a significant factor in the gap, because we know what schools do to try and address the gap, but actually there may be situations slightly outside their control that are affecting it, because it is a national issue. And so that was the point I was interested in on the whole of this. And then I've got one other little item that relates to the very end table.
I agree that demographics is really important. I think, you know, I work for someone in charge of quality and commissioning, and if you're going to look at sufficiency for SEND and a whole number of other things, it's really important. So as a pragmatic thing, it's not an excuse, but we don't have the data for 3 years in Key Stage 1 for reasons you can appreciate. One of the reasons why I want to look at us having a data agreement that I think I mentioned last time, where we literally share data through the system from the very earliest years onto each phase, each organisation, is partly because what it says about every single individual involved in the education and the development of young people is I am responsible for safely handing on what I have learned, what I have developed, etc., in order that you don't end up with any children, never mind children with SEND, reinventing the wheel, parents having to, and so on. I think schools would really value having that information shared. So we've talked about some of the things that might go into that. So postcodes, linking it to their unique pupil number, looking at their outcomes from early years, etc. All of that information moving up time by time, hopefully it then addresses how do we sort of see things decline over time, because we know where we started. But you're absolutely right. In a school, if you know that your cohort next year looks like this as it comes into year 7 or looks like this as it comes into key stage 1. That's very important information, and that isn't just demographics, it's also things that, as Julian was saying about the results in the virtual school, is the cohorts are sometimes completely different in some areas, and we've got some areas that are on the rise, and there are economic and practical implications. So sharing that information, an incentive of getting the schools to share back information with us is that we can share that information with them, which is powerful information for how they hit the ground running. So I'd be in agreement with that.
Come back on that briefly, Chair. One of the things that and discussions I've had in the past is how important it is for schools at the starter end to actually know the outcomes at the end of a young person's education, because those are the foundations and they should be leading to the results at the end. And I think you were referring the sharing of the data is very much also to do with tracking those pupils right through the system, rather than just treating key stage 1 as one bit, key stage 2 as another, and so on, and looking at them in isolation. So I think that follows on from what you were saying. Now, right at the very end, Chair, is a chart relating to, I assume, statistical neighbours, etc., etc. What struck me, that's page 65. It doesn't give a page for her, so it's page 65. Quite interesting. I mean, it shows the overall performance, which I think is really good. But one area stood out for me in nearly every category, and that's Southend-on-Sea, which is doing better than us in nearly all the aspects. So I was just wondering whether there is an opportunity here to get some outside experience to bring best practice in, unless you already know what Southend are doing to get those results. But I'm just raising that as that stands out in that chart. And if we are not satisfied with where we are at the moment and wanting to improve even further, is there something that the Southend authority can actually tell us?
So the short answer is what the statistical neighbour information, and you're quite right, it's one of the ways that you can identify some areas that might have something to share with us. And we certainly will be talking to them, because this will be the first year we'll have been their statistical neighbour. So we certainly will be having a conversation with them. One of the questions I would have about that area, because I probably don't sound half Cockney, but I am, is that there's an awful lot of London drift to Southend-on-Sea, and there's been a lot of improvement in education in London. So how much of that is that and other factors we test out? But yes, it's very good for giving one a shopping list of other places where you think, oh right, okay, I'll literally give somebody a call and say, so what are you doing about that helps? But you need to look at their structure and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's a great point.
Thank you very much. Lisa, I believe you've got her.
Thank you. I'm interested in, I don't know if this would be called Key Stage 5, but the children that are of that age for Key Stage 5 that have not, they haven't achieved the right qualifications to actually get into the normal Key Stage 5 courses, so they won't be able to go to the sixth form or go on to like a level 2 college course. So I've noticed that the courses then at the college it's like a very, very slow, drawn-out process to get these very basic foundation, or whatever they're called, English and maths. And also, particularly for ESOL kids, it can take a couple of years, whereas I've seen children who are doing English as a foreign language, if they come here a year earlier and go into school, they quite often seem to be coming out with a GCSE maths. Whereas they're not even, they're just a year later coming into the college, they're only with other children who don't speak English. They they seem to it just seems to slow right down. They're not allowed to do any other subject until they've completed this course, which can even be 3 years before, and then they're 19 and they don't get the funding. And also it's not full time, it's only sort of for both groups. These aren't like if you're in sixth form you have got a full time sort of curriculum, but it seems like these are the kids who need it, and it's very sporadic, and I just wondered what your thoughts are really.
It's a big question. Councillor Breeze. So there's a number of things. So first of all, generally speaking, inside of education up to Key Stage 4, you're absolutely right to say that children who arrive with another language, or children who have 2 or 3 languages, once they get over, if they've been born here, or whenever they arrive, once they get over the first hiccups, they actually do incredibly better than children who are born here and are only born speaking English and perhaps don't even really like modern foreign languages. They actually do really, after a stuttering start, they do very well. The schools, I'm not talking about local schools, but schools nationally, often a sign of that has been that they will then get a qualification in the languages that they did, which are also in the EBAC, and also maths, as maths teachers are always telling me, is the only international or intergalactic language. So therefore, unless you're a Maori, you're probably, wherever you've come from on the planet pretty much otherwise, you'll be doing, maths will actually be a place where you'll feel at home, however good you are at maths, because you'll arrive and you'll think, oh, I understand this. So it's a good grounder as a subject. Post 16, and you can call it Key Stage 5 or Post 16, but we tend to use Key Stage 5 when we talk about sixth forms and A levels, although there are other courses taught there. The college is more complex answer. Neil and I were actually visiting the college today, and so one of the issues there is that the learners are actually on a separate bit of the site because of they're not integrated into the site of the rest of the college in the way that the college principal would like. So we were having conversations with her exactly about that. But one of the things we need to do with Post 16 is to educate them about what the cohorts look like, because it hadn't occurred to the college until I mentioned it to them a month ago, just how much single-sex education we have in secondary. So when they're going to the college, they have all kinds of things happening to them that are just a bit of a surprise. Many of them positive, but it's a bit of a shock. They're in a very different environment, and all of a sudden they've gone from single sex to mixed, and they've gone to a much more diverse curriculum. So I think there are a lot of things that, you can send me an email and we can have a longer chat about some of those issues, but we are raising those with the college, and we don't think the college is the only answer to that.
Thank you. Mark, I think you had a...
Yeah, I don't think I've been a head teacher in Bournemouth for 12 years. I just recently retired. I don't think the councillors should kid themselves that they can take, as a local authority, we can take credit for the results or take the rap for poor results, because the local authority are grappling with the fact that how do you actually get influence in schools? If you've got schools in academy groups, some in an academy group in Plymouth, some in Basingstoke, some and clusters within Bournemouth that don't talk to each other, they just talk to themselves as a cluster. And the only lever we've really heard about so far is holding a conference. When you actually try to talk to a regional school commissioner that actually allows schools to link with schools down in Plymouth rather than go with academy groups in Bournemouth, we're not even being able to get cooperation from a regional schools commissioner. So what are the other levers you've got available to actually persuade people that they should even come to the conference?
That's a very long answer. So I agree that for a long time, predating the time that I've been here, that Bournemouth and Poole, two of our predecessor councils, well, to a certain extent walked away from school improvement is how I would characterise it. And it is absolutely true that we are in a more academised system than in other parts of the country, roughly in ratio terms about the reverse of many of the other parts of the country. But there's a number of things I would observe. First of all, in terms of the secondary sector in BCP, the majority of the academies are standalone. And from that point of view, I wouldn't say this very publicly, but they need us. And whether they say that in public or not, that is absolutely not my experience. They also need each other. I think a lot of them have been behind closed doors for a number of years thinking, I wish there was a friendly face out there. And I'm not just talking, obviously I have a lovely face, so obviously that helps. But I've said before, and I will say this for, hopefully I'll be here till I retire. But for me, partnership is absolutely key. And so there are a number of levers that we have. So first of all, we have our own authenticity. When Julian arrived, he was a bit nervous when he was first talking to them as a group about challenging them, about how uninclusive some of them were. We weren't even sure that they would turn up. They turned up. They're starting to offer some support, and we continue to tell them the truth. And they need that. They need people they can rely on to tell them the truth about how well they're doing, but how they could do even better. And also, in terms of the funding, and the funding will be entertaining as an ex-civil servant over the next few years, more money will come in, but it will be complex. And to get their hands on some of that money, they will need to have champions who understand what they actually can do with that money and how they can deploy it. That's one of the reasons we're writing an area self-evaluation, because then we can quite clearly say to government, this is the need, because there are needs here. And they need a champion for that. And I think we will be, and we are beginning to be that. There are also statutory responsibilities that we share with them and that they can't do on their own. So yes, some of them don't get along with each other. Some of them need some persuasion to do that, but there are lots of them who really do want to work together. The Regional Schools Commissioner, who I have a very constructive relationship with, but the Regional Schools Commissioner is only interested in academisation very politically. She's not really interested in how well those academies are doing. And she has one offer to make, and that is replace this one with this one. And that means that within a year, somebody can lose their job. So their vulnerabilities are still there. With the primaries, they very much want to work with us, and they very much want to work with each other. And so there are some individuals that we may discuss in a confidential way at another point. But for the vast majority of them, they want to do a good job, and they are struggling to do that without us. They need us.
Thank you very much. I feel we've come to an end there. We could really do with something to. My feeling is two parts here. I think we very much support and agree with you looking at the data to what's causing the difference between boys and girls, and I think would really encourage you to continue with that and to come up with anything you find out and probably report it back to us. And I think would also very much encourage your work that you're doing to engage academies, because I know it's something that we've had conversations about before, it's very important. I think so. We go on to the forward plan. Now, you all had a chance to have a quick look at the forward plan. Hopefully we're not going to spend too long on that, because with the work we was doing yesterday, we're going to be adapting and changing the forward plan in the future. So any comments on the forward plan? No, in that case we can take that. And the dates for the future meetings, and I believe dates and venues are on this. Are we no comments on that? I wouldn't imagine. Not at the moment. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yes. Yeah. So you think we should have isolation booths that we can all be in? Yeah, LJ.
I think we've proved Christchurch is incredibly difficult to get to within rush hour. Could we not alternate Poole, Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole, Bournemouth, Christchurch? Because that's not how the council's made up, and it is just a real pain.
I know we had a discussion on this a couple of meetings back. And we decided at that point that we did think about trying to change it, but we decided we preferred it that way in the end, unless anybody has changed their mind. Yeah.
Well, could I just say that the Health and Adult Social Care Committee, we've decided to have our meetings at Bournemouth every time, because then, the Poole people can go, and Christchurch people, and we don't have to have Poole people going all the way over to Christchurch and Christchurch people going all the way over to Poole. Although, having said that, I suppose it is worse at the moment because of all the road works. But yeah, true.
Can I suggest, because it's quite late in the meeting to sort of discuss this. Have a look at if you could email me your thoughts, and then we could share that, and we'll think about it at a future meeting, if that's possible. Okay, so just to remind, just before I close the meeting, that we do have an information session for those councillors who want to remain for it after this. So I shall thank everybody and close the meeting.